So now I invite you to just be present, just be here now. Step into prayer with me. Spirit, infinite presence, all that is right here, right now. Divinity expressing as each of us. In this space, there is quite enough love for everyone, enough joy, enough peace, enough faith. It is so wonderful to be in the flow of this divine essence, knowing that I am one with divine mind. Each of us is one with all that is, with spirit, and with this infinite presence. And as I take that in, I am so joyful because I am grateful for this day, for this moment. And in this spirit of the divine flow, I think of children who approach each moment with curiosity, knowing that the universe of divine possibilities is right there. And just as these little ones open their hearts and spirits, we are ready. We are ready, willing, and available for more good in our lives than we ever experienced, manifested, imagined, or realized before. And in this knowing, being in this foundational space of divine energy as each one of us, I know that the words spoken today inspire. The music is joy. Coming together in community and just being present is love. These gifts are truly ours. These gifts are flowing through each of us. And sometimes all we need to do is open the door to our hearts, because all these gifts are always flowing. And knowing this, knowing that each of us is a beacon of light, knowing that each of us is expressing this divinity, with the deepest gratitude, I release this into the law, claiming this as our good, knowing this is already so. And in closing, I affirm, and so it is.
So this whole month, we're going to be working with the idea of deep knowing, and it comes from this book by Kim Hermanson called Deep Knowing. Wonderful book. I highly recommend it. Kim is also the author of Getting Messy, which was the inspiration for our April theme of Life is Messy. Yes. I met her a few years ago at a conference, and just we hit it off, and I just really love her work and what she does. So. And we're going to start today with and the idea behind deep knowing is that this is nothing new for us who have been practicing it, but maybe just kind of experiencing it, that there is a deeper wisdom, a deeper something that we can tap into, and to do that process, to work that process, to take the time for that. So we start off today with the idea of uncommon perception. Uncommon perception. You know, we have a saying in religious science, change your thinking, change your life. It could also be said, change your perception, change your life. Most, if not all of us, perceive from within a system of conditioned thought, conditioned beliefs, which tell us what to see and, by definition, what not to see. Most of us don't pay attention to certain things around us, right? Most of us have had that experience at some point in time. God, I never saw that there, but it was there all the time, okay? And so we're trained to see what exists and what doesn't exist. And our perceptions are usually very self-oriented, orbiting around what I like and what I don't like, what I'm comfortable with and what I'm not. Mm. I oftentimes use the metaphor of we as a species tend to be geocentric. And so we look at the sun and we say, it's rising and it's setting. But as you know, my favorite Pink Floyd song quote is, the sun is the same in a relative way, but we're moving. We're moving. So we tend to orient ourselves to the world should be the way that I want it to be. Anybody besides me ever do that? You don't have to raise your hands too high, but okay. So in religious science, we like to pride ourselves on being on the cutting edge of consciousness, where we're looking forward and we're seeing that. But I'll tell you that the cutting edge of consciousness is A, lonely, and B, not comfortable place to be. Okay? Because if you're on the cutting edge of anything, most everybody else is not there, right? There, if you've ever seen the bell curve, it's like, here's this leading edge, here's the big bulk of people, here's the trailers, A couple decades ago, I worked for Amazon.com, and we talked about early adopters, and then earlier purchases, and so when some new technology would come out, there would be the first few people who'd want to have it just because it was new technology, and they didn't care if it cost 5 times what it was going to cost a year from then. They wanted to be the first with it, right? And then there were the people who would wait for a year for it to come down in price. And then after a while, a couple of years later, there'd be, it would get caught on to the bulk of people. And then a couple of years later, the last half of the people would, finally say, well, maybe I should get a cell phone too, And then finally, there are those who go, I'm never getting a cell phone, or my flip phone is good enough, or whatever. And so we're like that in consciousness. That seems to just be the human process, that we have cutting edge. So we like to be, if we're going to be on the cutting edge, we have to realize that it's not a comfortable place to be. Think of an ice cutter that's going through ice. It's going through the resistance to make a path. And so we are going through the resistance of thousands of years of conditioning in our own minds to make a path to expand ourselves. And to be doing this, it demands constant attention, constant examination, and constant expansion. In other words, we have to be paying attention. Many of you know that I like that word, attention. I even have a Zen story for it, which I'll save for another time. But some of you know that. Oh. The purpose of spirituality is freedom and liberation for us and for all people, from all the ways that we're imprisoned and enslaved by old patterns of conditioning imposed upon us. Most of us never had a choice. Last week I talked about the fact that most of us never had a choice in our name unless we changed it consciously as adults afterwards. We got taught what we were called from very, very, very early on. And nobody ever said, yeah, you don't see a 6-month-old saying, no, I don't like that. That's not my real name. My real name is, Queen of the World, or, yeah. But your mom gave you a different name, and so, even though it was a queenly name that you were named after. So all the great spiritual teachers have freed themselves from this entrapment of that and have done their best to inspire others to be free, to help all of us lift. But the journey to freedom is not easy, and it never concludes. John Lewis, in his book Across That Bridge, said, freedom is not a state, it is an act. It is not some enchanted garden perched high on a distant plateau where we can finally sit down and rest. Freedom is the continuous action we all must take, and each generation must do its part to create an even more fair, more just society. And each of us must do our part to create an even more free, more fair, more just person that we are. We don't arrive and say, good, I'm done, I thought that was going to happen when I became a licensed religious science minister. And Buffy's looking forward to that day when she just gets that title, it says minister, and we're done. But it turns out that that's just the start of the next school. And we keep on the journey. So it's not easy to awake from the hypnotized domestication of our various cultures telling us who we are, what we are, and how we should be, right? Most cultures treat people like that as heretics, which they are, because they're heresy to the status quo. And the status quo doesn't like people who stand up and say, oh, wait a minute, I got a different idea. And so then they do little things like drive them away, they exile them, they kill them, burn them at the stake, all that sort of stuff that was in the past. And we still do this in a slightly more civilized way today. We kick people we don't like, people who disrupt our comfortable condition, how it should be, out of our lives. Anybody relate? Anybody here been kicked out of a life of somebody that you disrupted their how it should be? Or you've kicked somebody out of your life? Don't put your hands up, it's okay. But just know that, most of us have done that or experienced that. We kick them out of our lives, not recognizing that it's our own conditioned perceptions and our fear of having them disrupted that are doing the rejecting. Got that? It's our perceptions and our fear of having them disrupted. Oh my God, what would I do if I wasn't living this way? I don't know, and so it's scary. One of the biggest human fears is the unknown. And if I don't know how to be, if I don't know how to act, if I don't have my safe little net of this is how I've always done it, it gets scary. We'll take those same perceptions and patterns into our next life experience, into our next relationship, into our next job, boss, coworkers, our next church and minister. And when you start realizing that you've got the same relationship over and over again, just with different faces on it, some people, but not everybody, starts to wake up and say, it might not be them. There's an old story of a man who's sitting outside the city walls of an ancient city, and a traveler comes by and says, I'm looking for a new place to live. How are the people in this city? And he looks up at him and says, well, how were the people in the last place you lived? And he said, oh, they were mean and cruel and cheated people. And he said, you'll find the same people here. And so the man moved on. And about an hour later, another traveler comes up and asks the same question. I'm thinking of a new city. What kind of people live here? And he says, what kind of people lived in your last place? He said, they were really kind, they were wonderful, they were fun to be with. And he said, you'll find the same people here. There's that old saying of wherever I go, there I am. There I, with all my stuff, am. And I co-create the same relationships over and over again out of my perceptions and conditioned beliefs. We live in a universe that is constantly seeking to help us wake up. Wake up. By giving us repeated opportunities to see where we are stuck, where we are asleep. But instead of seeing these as opportunities and gifts, oh my God, how wonderful. That person just disrupted my comfortable pattern. Thank you. We tend to not do that. We tend instead to get mad because they challenge our limiting perceptions and beliefs and push back at the message and the messenger. If someone upsets us, we point our finger at them, saying they upset us, and never look within and examine the place within us that got upset. We just get mad because we all have theys, right? They pushed our button, and we don't ask, what is that button? Where does it live within me? Where did it come from? What must I believe that caused me to make myself upset? How about if every time we got upset, instead of saying, that person made me upset, we say, what is it within me that chose to get upset about what that person did? Different energy, yes? A less comfortable energy, a more challenging energy, but a greater potential for us to awaken, to start to see, oh, look at that, I've got this belief working. One of our core beliefs is that we must never be uncomfortable or challenged. Yes? Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yet growth demands discomfort. They go hand in hand. The Hindu sage Ramana Maharshi said, wanting to reform the world without discovering one's true self, in other words, without discovering what I really am, who I really am, is like trying to cover the world with leather to avoid the pain of walking on stones and thorns. It is much simpler to wear shoes. It is much simpler for me to deal with my stuff because the world has thorns and stones. Have you noticed? Okay. Wearing shoes is doing our own work instead of demanding that the world change so I'm never comfortable. Life isn't always likable. We've all lived long enough to have gone through things that were unlikable, yes? Right. And uncomfortable. Only to realize down the road later that we had to go through that in order to grow into something new that we've become since then. And so we come to these points that it's like, oh, I don't want to go through this. This is nasty. This is uncomfortable. This is painful. And so we put it off as long as we can. This is called the dark night of the soul oftentimes for people. And John of the Cross, who wrote about the dark night of the soul, said, if you can avoid it, do so at all costs. But when you find yourself in it, no matter what you do, how many of us have found in a dark night of the soul, no matter what we did to try to avoid it, right? Okay? You go into it and get the most out of it that you can. Learn what we can from that experience. The uncomfortableness that we experienced usually involved a letting go of some cherished idea, situation, or person. I have to let go. That may once have been wonderful, but have become a cage stifling our growth. We sometimes sing that Melissa Felipe song about going through transformation, kicking and screaming. Yeah? And a lot of us have left claw marks in various parts of our lives, right? No, I've got to have this relationship. No, I've got to have this job. This is the one. This is the right thing. This is my way is the right way. Life is not always likable, but it is always trustable. Life is a shaman. Life is a shaman calling us to a broader perspective than we have had before, to an expanded way of seeing out of our cages where we're stuck. When we're stuck in our cages, we view life as a set of polarities. I'm for this and I'm against that. Yes? We see this throughout our country. Has anybody besides me noticed we're kind of seeing that in our country right now? Okay. And the world. We see this in our personal relationships. If you're not for me, you're against me. Breathe. If you're not doing it the way I think you should, then you're doing it wrong. My way is the right way. My way or the highway. And then we try to cover the other in leather. You should change to match the way that I think you should be. How do we like it when people do that to us? Yeah, I don't like it either. So what if there's a third way? What if there's a third path, a way of creative possibility and movement, beyond the polarities of my way or the highway? What if there's a way out in the field beyond ideas of right thinking and wrong thinking, as Rumi talked about? What if we move beyond the problem? Because most of us are really conditioned to be good problem solvers, yes? And I can spot a problem from a mile away and point it out, and if I can't solve it, you should. Yeah. And she will. What if we moved beyond the problem and expanded our ability to see in new ways? What if we step back and remembered that there is a something greater than me? Oh my God. Exactly. And what I call myself, which is really mostly a set of conditioned beliefs, stories, and patterns. We all think that we are a unique individual, and in one way we are, but we're mostly a collection of beliefs, stories, and patterns. And that infinite something and our true self are in reality one and the same. It's not a big thing up there, out there somewhere. The very essence, the very core of who I am and that are one and the same. And I can call on that anytime. Mostly we've forgotten that, lost in the foggy cage of conditioned perceptions, yes? In the movie The Matrix, I love The Matrix. It's my favorite spiritual movie, the first one especially. In the movie The Matrix, the first thing the people freeing Neo need to do, Neo's the main character, the protagonist. The first thing the people freeing Neo need to do after Neo says yes to being freed is to locate him. Where is the real you? Not the pretend you that's in the Matrix. Where is the essence of who you really are? Without finding that self, we can't become free. So our first task is to be willing to be free. We have to say yes. Yeah? We have to be willing. Being aware that freedom might be uncomfortable. And then to find our authentic self, which we do by both deep spiritual practice, taking the time to go within, taking the time to go through the layers and the layers and the layers of foggy conditioning and say, wait, what's underneath that? This is why when somebody pisses me off, I can say that word here, right? So, okay. Yes, I can say it here. And somebody might be upset by it, and that's their conditioning. But anyways, no lightning has struck me yet for all those words that I said. And so am I, fortunately. She said the day is young for those who are online. Yes. We do it by deep spiritual practice, by going down through those layers, through those layers. Who am I really? When we start to do things like you upset me, and instead say, wait, what is it within me that's upset about that? We start to go through those layers. We start to look at them. We start to become aware of them. I lived in Los Angeles for 5 years, and I used to go hiking in Griffith Park with a group. And we get up in the evenings up above the park, and we see this sort of greenish soup. This is in the late 70s. Greenish soup hanging over the city. And it's like getting up and going, ooh, I live in that. I live, breathe, and have my being in that. So by going through those layers, we start to see the layers, and we start to say, no, get me to some fresh air. Get me to some authentic who I am. So that's the first thing, is our deep spiritual practice. And the second thing is simply enough by asking that something within us to reveal its nature as our true self to us. Asking. And unlike the Matrix, the reality isn't harsh or ugly. Though sometimes, like an addict getting sober, we may first go through withdrawal from all of our addictions, and then we may need to do a fearless moral inventory and make amends from the life of being addicted to our conditioned beliefs and patterns. And it might feel a little uncomfortable at first, but walking through that fire of discomfort leads us to an expanded creative life. Far less imprisoned by our old conditioned beliefs, less jerked around by our old conditioned belief and our reactions to them and to other people. It gives us the ability to experience life authentically, with love and curiosity, with creativity and joy and playfulness, and an awareness that we are not alone on this journey. Most of us have forgotten or are not aware that there is more happening than just me, myself, and I, or even just the stuff on this little planet. Breathe. And to remember that we are standing in the light of an infinite presence. So I want to invite us to do 3 practices this week. 1, notice if you are truly willing to awaken from your sort of comfortable prison. Your sort of comfortable prison. In the story of the Exodus in the Bible, Moses is leading the people out of slavery in Egypt, and they're not very far down the road when they sit there and go, no, no, we want to go back. At least we know where we're going to die and we have beds to sleep in. Okay? And they go whining for about 40 years until they all die off through that process. So am I truly willing to awaken from my sort of comfortable prison of old beliefs and conditioning? And if not, what am I afraid of? What are you afraid of? Just notice that. So that's the first one. Are you truly willing to wake up? If the answer is yes, that's the second pattern is, if or when the answer is yes, ask your highest self, whether you think you have one or not, whether you know it or not, to reveal itself, your capital S self, to you more fully. Ask it. Being willing to awaken, ask it to show you what it's like. And thirdly, as you go through this week, notice, pay attention. When you get upset, ask yourself, instead of why did who are they and what did they do to upset me? Ask yourself, what within me chooses to be upset about that? What beliefs are being triggered? Are you willing to play with that this week? It's a difficult spiritual practice. It's an uncomfortable spiritual practice, but it leads to freedom. One of my favorite other movies, although I can't watch it, is The Shawshank Redemption, where he walks through half a mile of sewage to get free from the prison. And sometimes that's what it feels like that we have to do, is walk through a half a mile of a sewage pipe. My claustrophobia kicks in whenever I see that scene. But walk through a half a mile of sewage pipe in a claustrophobic situation to get free. But if we keep our eye on the freedom, which he did, we become free. But it's uncomfortable maybe in the process for a while. So are you willing to play with that this week? Yeah, I didn't hear much either. Okay, a few begrudging yeses. So we have an affirmation, and then I'm going to close with a prayer instead of a quote. Okay. So our affirmation, join me in the affirmation. I am willing to wake up and see life with fresh eyes. One more time. I am willing to wake up and see life with fresh eyes. And so I know that there is this infinite presence, whether I am aware of it or not, whether we are aware of it or not, it still is. I often forget it, it still is. Even on the days that are cloudy, the sun is still above us. Or on the other side of the world, because it moves around, we don't. But there is this infinite light, this infinite presence, this infinite goodness that is always, 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 always present. And I know that I and every person in the sound of my voice is one of that. And every person who's not within the sound of my voice is also one of that, because there is only that. And so I speak my word that we are willing to wake up more fully, more deeply, more expansively to the true nature of who we are, the authentic, joyous, creative, powerful, vibrantly alive selves that we truly are. I breathe that in. I breathe that out. I let the breath of the divine nature, whatever name I give it, breathe me. Flow through every cell, every atom, every subatomic particle, and the space within of my body, of my beingness, every aspect of my beingness. I say yes to deeper and deeper and more full and more expansive awakening. And know that every person here who says yes to that is shown the way, whatever their way is. Because the universe answers and says yes right back. And I'm grateful for this process. I'm grateful for this fabulous dance that we do. This dance of and as and in the divine that we are doing. And so I speak this word and release it into a law that simply says yes, moves it into form, expression, and experience with our acceptance. And we accept that by saying, and so it is.